At the family Christmas dinner, my father lifted his glass, looked me dead in the eye and said, "In our eyes you're already dead." The room fell silent. My sister choked on her laughter beside him, covering it with a sip of wine. My mother just stared at her plate as if my existence had become a stain she couldn't scrub away. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I just smiled, leaned back in my chair and whispered, "Understood. My name is Rachel Morgan. And from wherever you're watching this, stay with me. Have you ever been treated like a stranger in your own family? Like the moment you stopped serving a purpose, they decided to bury you alive?" I remember how the fairy lights flickered across their faces that night, how their laughter returned as if I'd never been born. It was December 24th. Outside, snow fell softly. Inside, my world burned to ash. I had spent years paying their bills, covering my sister's student loans, even buying them this very house we were sitting in. All from my marketing job, 60-hour weeks, no vacations, no boundaries. But none of that mattered now. In their eyes, I wasn't family. I was a wallet. And tonight that wallet had closed. When I stood up to leave, my sister, Olivia, smirked. "Don't be so dramatic, Rachel. It's Christmas." I paused at the doorway, gripping my coat. "You'll wish I was dead," I murmured. "Because when I'm gone you'll feel it." They laughed as I walked out into the snow. 2 months later I'd built a new life, quiet, peaceful and mine. Until one night the doorbell rang. Once, twice, then nonstop. When I opened the door I saw them, my parents, pale and trembling. "Rachel," my mother whispered, "please, we need your help." I just stared, then smiled. The dead cannot come back. And I shut the door. But the thing about ghosts? They always find a way back in. The knocking didn't stop that night. Even after I turned off the lights and pulled the curtains, it kept echoing through the house like thunder trapped inside my walls. "Rachel, please," my mother's voice cracked. Behind her, my father shouted my name like it was an order, the same tone he used when I was a kid and forgot to say, "Thank you," fast enough. But I didn't move. I stood in the dark, barefoot on the cold tile, my heart steady. 2 months ago they killed me. Tonight I was simply honoring the funeral. My name still echoed in the hallway. "Rachel, please open the door." Took everything in me not to laugh. Because the truth? They didn't come for me. They came for what I could do for them. Earlier that day I'd seen a notice in the local paper. Morgan and Company. Realty facing foreclosure. My father's company. The empire he built on my mother's charm and my hard-earned savings. The same empire I'd helped rebuild after his last failure. Until I refused to invest again. Now they were drowning. And like clockwork they'd come crawling to their dead daughter. I finally opened the blinds just enough to see them through the frost. Dad's coat was soaked. Mom was clutching a folder, probably filled with documents she wanted me to sign. Olivia wasn't there. Of course she wasn't. She never faced consequences. I let them knock until their hands must have gone numb. Then I stepped outside. The air bit at my skin. I kept my voice soft. "You said I was dead," I reminded them. Mom's eyes filled with tears. "We didn't mean it." "Yes, you did." I cut her off. "You meant every word." Dad took a step forward. "You're still our daughter." I tilted my head. "Am I?" He faltered. I could smell the whiskey on him even through the cold. Then Mom did what she always did, she begged. "Rachel, please. The bank froze our account. We'll lose the house. Your father's health." I held up my hand. "You'll lose everything. That's not a tragedy. That's math." Her sob echoed down the street. I turned, walking back toward the door, and before stepping inside, whispered, "Tell Olivia I said hi. I'm sure she's the one who told you where I live." Then I closed the door and slid the lock. Behind it, their voices cracked into the night, begging, promising, swearing they'd change. But I'd learned something powerful since the Christmas dinner. Sometimes, peace doesn't come from forgiveness. It comes from silence. And that night my silence was the loudest thing they'd ever heard. They didn't stop coming. Every night for a week I heard their car pull up. Sometimes they'd sit there in silence. Other times Mom would leave notes under the door, trembling handwriting that still smelled faintly of her perfume. "We're sorry. Please talk to us. We have nowhere else to go. I didn't respond to a single one. I'd already learned the pattern. Apologies were currency in my family. They spent them only when they wanted something. But on the seventh night something changed. When I came home from work, my front door was cracked open. Every muscle in my body froze. I stepped inside quietly, the way you do when you already know what you're going to find but hope you're wrong. And there they were. My parents sitting in my living room like ghosts who'd broken into their own funeral. My mother jumped up when she saw me. Rachel. Thank God. We just needed to talk. Get out. She blinked. Sweetheart. I'm not your sweetheart, I said, my voice sharp enough to slice through the air. My father stood up slowly, his face pale. We had no choice. Olivia told us you'd listen if we... Olivia was wrong. He winced like I'd hit him. And maybe in a way I had. They started talking over each other, words tripping, desperate. Something about Olivia being arrested, a business loan, fraud in my name. That last part caught my attention. In my name. I repeated. Dad looked away. It was just paperwork. You know how she is. How you all are, I corrected. My mother started crying harder. I stood there staring at them both, realizing the betrayal wasn't new. It had simply evolved. I walked to my desk, opened my laptop and pulled up my online banking. And there was a $40,000 loan taken out under my identity 3 months ago, the same week they told me I was already dead. The room tilted. My breath came shallow. I looked at them, the parents who raised me, the people who taught me right from wrong, and felt nothing but a calm, hollow kind of rage. Get out, I said again, slower this time. Before I forget, I'm your daughter, and remember, I'm just another creditor. Dad's face hardened. You wouldn't dare turn on your own family. I met his stare. You already did. I opened the door, waiting. They left without another word. But before my mother stepped out, she turned, eyes wet and trembling. You're not like us, Rachel, she whispered. You were supposed to save us. When the door closed behind them, I let out a sound I didn't recognize, half sob, half laugh. Because maybe that was the problem. I wasn't supposed to save them. I was supposed to bury them. And this time I would make sure they stayed dead. I stopped pretending my anger was noise. I folded it into a map. The theft was a good thing. A terrible gift. A $40,000 loan in my name, a paper trail that smelled of their fingerprints. If they wanted me dead, I would make my own resurrection out of ink and subpoenas. I called a lawyer the next morning. Her name was Lana Price. Small firm, bigger teeth. When I walked into her office, I felt a childish thrill. Paper and law, two things that could cut the kind of people who thought love could be faked into signatures. Lana didn't coddle me. She handed me a form and said, "We freeze everything first. Then we see how many lies they tell." I froze their accounts. Not all of them, enough to stagger them, to make the world they had built wobble. I filed a police report for identity theft. I stapled copies of emails, bank statements, the folded note my mother had slipped under my door the week before. I printed the loan paperwork and circled names. Olivia's name appeared more times than it had any right to. There it was, a wire transfer to a shell company she co-owned. The more I dug, the more the neat architecture of our family's lies collapsed into scaffolding propped up with my money. Thought about calling Olivia. I imagined her smirk, the careless cruelty I'd seen at the dinner table. But I wanted something better than a fight. I wanted exposure. I wanted the slow, public unraveling. I started with the bank. Lana drafted a letter that smelled of threat. It froze assets in place and sent a notice to Morgan & Company. Realty. Pending investigation. The next morning my parents' world was all screens and panic. I watched them from my kitchen window, hands pressed to the glass like animals at the zoo, and felt nothing but clinical satisfaction. But there's a part of revenge that no spree book teaches you, the quiet arithmetic of consequences. When I pulled a thread, it tugged on other things. Tenants called my phone asking if the properties would be maintained. Contractors demanded deposits. The company's messy money problems bled into people who had nothing to do with me. I began to see collateral damage as its own kind of betrayal. That night, Dad tried to meet me in the grocery store parking lot. He looked small beneath the sodium lights, like someone who had been made into a child by his own desperation. Rachel, he said, and there was nowhere for his voice to go. Please. We can fix this. He sounded like a liar trying to sound earnest. Fix it how? I asked. By stealing from me? By pretending I don't matter until you do? He had no answer. His silence was louder than any excuse. When I went home, there was a message on my phone. A photo from an unknown number. It was Olivia, smiling at a fundraiser, raised glass, caption. Someone should throw a party when family gets what they deserve, winking face. The image slammed into me like a promise. I felt the compass inside me swing. For months I'd been precise, surgical. But seeing her toast to their ruin, to the wreckage I was now forced to navigate, something colder than law clicked into place. I wasn't just going to expose them. I was going to make them feel what it is to be erased in public, to have the world watch as you vanish. So I began to assemble other things. Statements, witnesses, a timeline written in bloodless facts. I would grind the family into a cautionary headline, but first I would make sure every accusation was an arrow that couldn't be bent. And as I sealed the last envelope for the day, I realized the strangest thing. The plan wasn't only for them. It was a map back to me. I wasn't simply collecting evidence. I was digging the place where I would one day bury what they'd done. The shovel was words. The ground would be truth. They thought the papers and the DA would be enough to knock me down. They were wrong. Within days, the small town I'd grown up in became a courtroom of whispers. Tenants called my phone asking if their leases were secure. My inbox filled with sympathies and threats. A parade of strangers suddenly invested in our family collapse. Olivia took to social media like a viper, painting herself as the wounded child and me as the vengeful villain. She posted screens of private texts, edited, captioned with thin, performative grief. Family matters are complicated. Don't believe everything you see. My boss called me into a meeting because reputation matters. HR wanted to discuss my conduct. A local blogger called for a boycott. Someone plastered flyers outside Morgan and Company, my name circled in red. They were trying to make my life smaller, noisier, unbearable. I remember the way Lana looked at me that morning. Patient, tired. They'll try to discredit you, she said. They'll make this personal. I nodded. I'd expected smear tactics. I hadn't expected how slender the line between public perception and truth would feel beneath my feet. Then Olivia escalated. She filed a civil suit claiming I'd orchestrated the whole identity theft, to ruin her and seize the company. The papers landed on my kitchen table like a slap. The headline in the town paper read, "Family feud explodes. Daughter accused of betrayal." My face stared back at me, grainy and monstrous. That night someone keyed my car. The scratches read like a threat. My mailbox filled with anonymous letters, folded, thick with venom. And for the first time since the dinner, fear moved through me like a draft. Not the raw, paralyzing fear of the past, but a new, clinical fear. The one that sharp women learn to use. You sharpen yourself not only to cut others, but to cut away what holds you back. I had allies I didn't advertise. Lana had a friend at the DA who preferred facts to family ties. A tenant, Mrs. Klein, offered to testify about bounced checks and unfilled maintenance requests by Morgan and Company. A former accountant, someone who had been quietly paid off for years, flipped when I presented the wire transfers. Faces I'd once thought irrelevant became witnesses with voices. I built my own counterattack the way I'd built my life. Methodical, stubborn, tireless. I compiled records of every transfer, every signature, every meeting where Dad had forgotten to mention loans. I had dates. I had receipts. I had Olivia's signature where she'd tried to hide it. I recorded a voicemail from Dad asking me to handle a small thing 3 months before the loan appeared. I sat on that recording and let it simmer until the DA's office came calling. But the war changed me in smaller ways, the quiet ones that stack into a different person. I no longer ate when I wasn't hungry. I learned to dress like someone who would not be pitied. I practiced calming my voice until anger sounded like fact. And at night, when the house was quiet, I held the credit card statement with the $40,000 charge and thought about where rage and grief meet. They meet at a ledger. Olivia tried to humiliate me in public and thought she could drown me out with noise. Instead, she showed me where the weak boards were in her own floor. Each lie she told created a new fracture, and I stepped on those fractures until the whole thing began to tilt. One evening, as rain hammered the windows, Lana phoned with a soft, dangerous laugh. "We've got a subpoena for Olivia," she said. "And a manila envelope from a bank overseas. Remember the shell company? It isn't as clean as they thought." My chest opened like a door. I felt something like triumph but colder, satisfaction tempered by exhaustion. I'd wanted them to feel erased, and for the first time, their carefully edited world showed raw seams. I learned their map of pride the way a thief learns a lock, by watching where the light hits, where the hinges creak. Pride is a house with windows left open. You don't need to break the door. You only need to open a curtain. Olivia's fundraiser was a gala in a hotel ballroom. Chandeliers like frozen constellations, guests wearing apology as an accessory. She'd invited everyone who still mattered in town. Realtors, small-town philanthropists, the woman who hosted the local radio hour. She wanted sympathy staged, perfumed, and photographed. She wanted the world to believe she was the betrayed child. She wanted applause. I bought a ticket. Not because I wanted to watch her perform, but because a spectacle is easier to ruin in public than in private. People remember the fall more than the footsteps that led to it. And there, under glass and applause, was their softest place: vanity. I dressed in something plain, the way you dress when you want to be invisible in a room full of spotlights. My hair hung loose. No jewelry. I wanted to be the shadow who hands a mirror to a liar. Olivia floated through the room like a practiced grief, smiling at cameras, sliding through conversations with the ease of someone who knows how to feign weakness and weaponize pity. My chest thudded in a rhythm that sounded like a countdown. I found her at the stage taking a picture with a bank vice president, the man whose name had surfaced in Lana's subpoenas. They posed, pressed lips, the sort of staged warmth that felt like a photograph taken before the scream. I walked up behind them, slow like someone moving through long grass. "Olivia," I said loud enough to cut through the hum. The photo flashed. Heads turned. Cameras angled. Her smile skinned itself into something tight. "Oh, Rachel," she said, the word a vial of acid. "Why are you here?" "To see who applauds the girl who toasts other people's ruin," I said. She laughed, shrill, and the sound scattered into the chandelier light. "You don't belong here." I let that be true for a moment. Then I did what I'd been planning all week. I walked to the podium during the awards. People thought I was another donor and someone waved me forward. I took the microphone like it belonged to a different life. "I don't usually do this," I said. The room hushed, the way a held breath suddenly decides where to land. But when people in this town invent victims to hide their crimes, I think the truth deserves a moment. Cameras swung toward me like moths. I spoke slow, clinical, the voice of someone who'd rehearsed nothing and meant everything. I read the facts. $40,000 in forged loans, wire transfers to Olivia's shell company, a bank flagged for suspicious activity. I named the offshore account, the address, the dates. I spoke the sentence my mother once told me at dinner: "You're already dead," and then I told them what it had meant to be called dead by your family, that the living would come when they needed blood. Olivia's face went through 3 colors: surprise, fury, a hardness of someone who had patched a disguise too often. The room shifted. Men with reputations stared at each other. The bank vice president's smile thinned. Someone whispered, and the whisper grew teeth. Flashbulbs popped like cheap thunder. She tried to scream slander. I handed the DA's subpoena to the hotel manager and asked that it be served immediately. Lana texted me one word: "Now." The staff moved like a wave. 2 men in plain suits emerged from the back and began to ask questions no gala planner wanted to hear. Olivia's supporters drifted away first, curdled loyalty dissolving when law arrives. The applause that had been hers turned into a thin, embarrassed murmur. The woman who'd once tutted about family values pushed back from the table as if burned. I watched pride dilute into panic, and a strange thing happened. My chest unclenched. The plan was not cruelty. It was correction, a public ledger for private theft. But as I stepped down from the podium, cameras still hot on my face, I felt something else. A hollow where vengeance lives. Outside, under a street lamp, I saw my parents' car idling. My father stared at the ballroom windows like a man who'd discovered his reflection was a stranger. My mother held her face in both hands, the perfume gone cheap from crying. I didn't go to them. I walked past and felt the strange lightness of someone who had finally unhitched their name from a lie. But in the pool of light by the car, Olivia's phone buzzed. She looked down, then up, eyes wide, and for the first time that night, there was no script on her face. She mouthed a single word I couldn't hear. I kept walking. A siren wailed in the distance. The town would remember this party for weeks. They would talk about who fell and who stood. They would pick sides. They would sell opinions like tickets. And I realized then what the next move had to be. Not another public humiliation, not another subpoena, but something that would strip the last thin skin off their legacy. I smiled, low and steady, and let the night hold its breath. March, I invited the tenants and a few of the board members to the first meeting of the trust. We sat around a battered table in a room with sunbeams that didn't bother to ask permission. People spoke in blunt, honest sentences about repairs and priorities in life. When I spoke, I didn't tell my story. I handed them the keys to a program that would not bend to private greed. At night, when my house is quiet, I sometimes stand at the window and watch neighbors living their small, perfect, ordinary lives. I feel a warmth that isn't made of triumph. It's made of steadiness. There are scars, of course. There are things I still want to say into the dark that will never be heard. But there is also a deep, unassailable knowledge that I did not let their verdict be my end. I learned how to be alive in the space they tried to take from me. I learned to build a home where my name is not a debt but a promise. And the last image I keep before I sleep is simple. A mailbox with my name on it, not a circle of red, but a small, honest rectangle where letters arrive and leave on equal terms. Facing them taught me.